Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Our focus this week is the Joplin Police Department, and joining me is Chief Sloan Rowland. And you've only been on the job basically since the first of the year, and I'd like to welcome you, first of all, to the program.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.
And someone were to ask you, you've had about a month or so as Chief. What are your first reflections now on the job as the Chief?
It's been interesting. Somebody described it as drinking from a fire hose because there's a lot of stuff to get done very quickly. This is a very busy time of the year for us.
Great. Well, let's start off with, before we get into some of those things that are happening in the department, a little bit of background. Some of our viewers may not be familiar with you. So how did you get started in law enforcement?
I actually started in Kansas. I did about 15 years in Kansas before I came over here. I worked on the ambulance in Kansas. I was an EMT over there, and a couple of my friends were police officers, and they talked me into riding along, and that kind of became a passion. And the day I turned 21, I actually swore in as a police officer, and that was in 1987, and I've been doing it ever since.
So police career since then.
Yes, yes.
And you've worked in Joplin for a number of years as well.
I got hired in 2003, so I've been here since 2003, roughly.
Right. You also have some military service and experience.
I have 28 years total. I did about 11 years in the Army and Army Reserve, started in the infantry and artillery, and then in 1998 I got picked up by NCIS. Switched over to the Naval Reserve and spent the rest of my time until 2015 when I retired from there.
Well, law enforcement is such a broad topic when you say it. There's a lot of, you mentioned NCIS, investigations, so any certain area that really intrigued you that you said, I really like this aspect of working in the field? Probably
because my forte for years was SWAT. I absolutely love being on SWAT. I ran a SWAT team when I was in Kansas. Came over here and got on the SWAT team my second year on. Did 12 years with the Joplin SWAT team, retired there as the team commander. So that was probably the funnest thing I've done in law enforcement so far.
Right. So someone who's thinking about law enforcement as a career, there's a lot of different ways they can go, a lot of different things they can look at.
Absolutely, and kind of like we spoke a little bit earlier, Joplin Police Department, we're that mid-sized department where you know everybody, but yet we're big enough to have a lot of different opportunities. So there's a lot of lateral movement, a lot of different jobs. If you want to be a canine officer, if you want to work investigations, if you want to do SWAT, we have all that. So it's been a great place for me to be able to move around and do different things.
So when you're looking for new members of the department, recruiting, you let them know that they have these opportunities, they can try to explore their career.
Absolutely, that's one of the things we try to sell to them. You're not going to spend, like a lot of departments, 10 to 15 years before you can move on. There's opportunities that are going to present themselves because we're a small enough department, but like I said, big enough that just about anything a major department has, we're going to have also. So there's a lot of opportunity with Joplin.
Now, using the term small for Joplin Police Department, of course, compared to other cities, but you have a large metro area. When you think about, of course, city limits are pretty large alone, and you're covering the area that you have to cover. We
do, and that's you know, that's been constantly expanding, as you know, for the last few years. We currently have 110 sworn officers. You know, if you go from one end of the city to another straight across, it's about 17 miles. Huge area. We kind of break that down into 5 beats right now, but there's a lot of area and a lot of population to cover. I know in the recent past you also have the south side of the city, which is your headquarters downtown, but you also have a substation that south side as well. Right. We moved a new substation onto 32nd Street. It was on South Main there for a while. We've got a little more traffic on 32nd, so we moved it there. It's right next door to the Newton County substation, their north substation, so we work very closely with them also. So it's been a good location for us. Does it make it interesting to have 2 counties in your city? I mean, you have Newton County and Jasper County, that line running through the department. It does, and you know, it really gets interesting sometimes for jurisdictional things. When you have crimes that cross over both, you're actually charging people sometimes in 2 separate counties. When you have a pursuit or anything like that, it usually entails, you know, several different jurisdictions by the time you're done, because we're kind of surrounded. You know, Joplin being the metropolitan area, you may end up dealing with 3 or 4 different agencies by the time you're done. I know Joplin has been, you know, in some of the interviews people talk about the Joplin, the city itself has a population that really booms during the weekdays of people coming into work and to shop, and you probably see this on the police side as well. We see that a lot. You know, if you go off the census, we've got about 52,000, depending on which statistic you look at. We can be 200 to 250,000 for people on a daily basis, and there's about 187,000, I think, people in the metropolitan area. So while we're judged on policing 52,000, we actually police a lot more people than that, which comes into play with statistics and stuff too when you're trying to figure statistics, because we police a very, very large population right now. Right, and of course we have certain parts of town, you have your retail areas, you have different parts of downtown, different areas where you probably have different emphasis as you talk about the different zones. Yes. And we do, and basically You know, just about anything. People come to Joplin to shop. They come to Joplin for medical care. You know, all those things. So it creates a lot of diversity in how we police and where we police.
When you had the opportunity to move up to chief, what do you feel helped you the most as far as your experience to prepare you for this position?
You know, I think one of the things that probably helped me a lot was I constantly tried to take on new challenges and move to different areas. So instead of a one-trick pony, I tried to get in every area and work there a little bit and figure it out. It helped a lot, obviously, having been a chief before I even came to Joplin and working in some of those supervisor roles. But just working in every area I possibly could, I think, helped a lot.
So that, once again, being able to have that many different areas of talent and working things
right.
together. Well, let's turn to the police department, and people are probably wanting to know, we were in 2020 now, a new decade, looking at the police department. What kind of priorities do you see for the police department?
You know, there's a lot of things we're looking at. Obviously, our first priority is going to be recruiting and retention. As with every agency in the United States right now, we're seeing that issue, and we've been dealing with it for several years. Nationwide, we've seen probably about a 60% drop in recruiting overall for those applicants that are even applying to be police officers. And you know, when I got hired in Joplin in 2003, we had about 130 people try out for 4 positions. We got to a point where we were lucky to get 15 or 20 applicants that were actually showing up to test. That's now increasing. We're in the 30s and 40s. We've opened up a lateral hire, so we're slowly getting built back up. We got to a point where we're down about 21 officers that were just openings. That's at times put us as many as 30 to 35 officers down on the street when you figure those that were in training or hurt or, you know, gone to deployments, things like that. Right now, I can happily say I'd like to be 100% full, but we're only down 7 officers right now, which is fantastic compared to where we were at a few years ago.
So you've seen some good progress.
We have. That's going to constantly be a thing we're working on for the next few years, and the city's done some pretty impressive things in the last few years to help us out with that. The pay increase, and you know, our benefits are good. There's a lot of things that are helping you know, bring those officers in. We opened a lateral hire program where we're actually hiring experienced officers and giving them up to a step 5 pay incentive to come over, and that's helped us out too. So I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge, is just getting back up to strength. I think the second challenge once we get up to strength is the kind of retraining, rebuilding. A lot of the positions we had that turned over and people retired were, you know, significant trained positions such as detectives and things like that. So getting those people in those key roles trained up to where they can do the job effectively, that's also going to be another challenge.
We see that on a lot of businesses. As the older, more experienced people retire, you have to fill those positions with people who may not quite reach that level of experience yet.
Absolutely, and you know, we changed our pension plan, as you probably seen in the press, and went to a loggers-based system, which, you know, I think in the long run is going to be great for the city, because we had a 20 and out and then a 25 and out when it was changed the second time. But it sounds great for the employee to be able to retire at 20 years, but 20 to 25 years is when you're getting those key employees trained up. They're an outstanding employee, and then you lose them to another department or agency somewhere else. So now that we'll be able to retain them up to 30, 35 years sometimes, or some even longer, I think that brings that experience back home and keeps it where it needs to be.
That'll help the overall operations of what you have in the department. Are operations kind of something that you're constantly assessing in the department? You know, we've done things a certain way for years. Do we need to take a different look at things? You know,
any professional organization, you should be constantly assessing, because what was effective 5 years ago, 10 years ago may not be effective today. And you know, crime trends change, different things change. You need to constantly be looking at. And I'd say as a department, we've done that for quite a while. We've looked at that and changed things as needed, you know, with specialty positions and different things like that. So I think that's a constant thing we do anyway. But one thing that we're going to be looking at is, as we get back up to strength, there's some of those areas that have maybe either been neglected or we haven't been able to fully show our time and attention to in the past couple of years.
Right. Well, let's go back to when you hire someone. You mentioned, you know, people taking the test. For the viewers that may not understand, you do hire an officer, you hire someone to work for you, but they don't necessarily hand them the keys to the car and say, okay, now you're going to go drive the streets.
Right. There's you know, it's kind of a long process. It's not like a lot of jobs where you have an interview and you're offered a job within 1 to 2 days. There's a whole series of things that happens. There's a background that goes with that. We do a polygraph test. We do psychological tests. We do a medical tests to make sure you have the ability to do the job. And then once we hire you, you're going to most of the time have to go to the academy if you're not already post-certified or Missouri State certified. Right. So we send you to the academy, which takes about 6 months. We bring you out and we put you in our 6-week in-house academy. Once you graduate that, you go into a 16-week field training program. So by the time you're done, it's almost a full year from the day we actually start looking at somebody until we put them on the street as a solo officer working in a car by themselves. And that's an extremely long process. So when you talk about attrition and turnover and the numbers that we've seen in the past, you can't immediately fill those people. So it's a definite rebuilding process.
So are they learning? You have mentors within the department they're learning from when they're in those training programs?
Absolutely. They, they have experienced people teaching them in that in-house. They have instructors at the academy, obviously here at Missouri Southern, when they go here that are teaching them, and all those are experienced officers. And then they actually sit down in a car with an officer that's done the job, that teaches them how to do the jobs and the mechanics of doing that job and how to do the job right. So they've got somebody with them pretty well all the way.
Good. I imagine technology plays a big role too in policing today, that you really have seen that change.
It does, I'm old enough and have done this job long enough now that technology is went a long ways, even in the equipment we carry and how we do our job from the computers and things like that. Guys laugh when I tell them I started with a wheel gun, a revolver, and a legal pad in the car.
So you write everything down.
They'd give me a call and I'd write it down and then scratch it out and make my notes and things for my report, but there were no computers or anything like that. It's grown leaps and bounds, and there is a constant challenge to stay ahead of that technology game, and we do a very good job, I think, at doing that. There's a lot of emphasis placed in trying to keep as current as we possibly can, and I think we lead this part of the state in how we do that. I think we do a very good job of staying on top of technology.
The technology helped the officers do their job. They're not, you mentioned writing things down on a legal pad.
Right.
They can get back on the street sooner because thanks to the computer being able to file reports and so forth.
Absolutely. Nowadays they don't have to go back into the station even to type. They can type, from their own car, and they can send it immediately. They can get responses back on the information they need while sitting in that car. They've got access to things that would have taken hours to do, in the past.
Now, when you look at the police department structure, I know you have a website that people can look at. But you have different breakdowns, bureaus. You have patrol, you have traffic,
right,
and so forth. So, explaining for people how you approach that. Someone sees a police car on the street, and they say, "Well, is that person looking for traffic, or is patrol?" How do we break them down?
Right. We have 4 different bureaus. The biggest bureau is the Uniform Service Bureau. That's most of the police cars you see driving down, black and whites that are patrolling, the traffic units, the K9 units. All those are under the Uniform Service Bureau. And then we have an Investigations Bureau that actually takes those crimes and investigates them once they come in. We have a Support Services Bureau that does all those things that support the ancillary services, because while we talk about 110 officers in the police department, you got to remember we have 163 employees, and we run our own jail and our own dispatch, plus all our support personnel and records and our staff along the way. So it's not just one operation we're looking at. And we have a Professional Standards Bureau, which also covers the training, internal affairs, policing ourselves, making sure we're doing the right thing, and we're holding the level of professionalism up too. So a lot of times when you see that car, he may be doing other things. He may not just be working traffic. He may be on his way to a call, he or she, and so it's kind of hard to just look at a car and realize what they're doing without knowing a little bit more.
You mentioned training, and a few years back we got a new training center in Joplin, and I guess basically it's a regional training center, but obviously the Joplin Police Department probably uses that quite a bit for your training.
We do use that quite a bit, and that's been one of the best things that happened to the police and fire department. That is a phenomenal facility. We have a lot of stuff that we used to have to go get trained on or go other places for that is now in-house. Inside there we have a mock-up jail cell where we can do jail training. We have a dispatch console in there. We have a defensive tactics room that's completely outfitted. We have a firearm simulator now that's out there. So, and plus the actual rooms that are expandable too. So we can teach classes of up to 100+ people out there at one time. So it's been great for us. And south of that we have the driving track, we have fire towers, and just a lot of stuff now that we didn't have in the past that we kind of have to make do with a building or something when it became available that is now all organic to us there.
So do you work in conjunction with the fire department on certain things? They have the ability to simulate a building fire and so forth, and how you coordinate.
Yeah, there's a lot. We work very closely with the fire department. They're our brothers and sisters. We kid them a lot, but I'm telling you, there's a very close bond between us and Joplin Fire, and they're a very, very professional group of men and women that we get along with quite well, even though we kid them a lot. But there's a lot of dual use. They have a facility out there at the tower that we can then use for entries and different things. So almost everything we have out there we share and we use for different purposes.
It helps everybody all around.
Yes, it does.
What about the demand for service for the police department? People, you know, you mentioned there's a lot of things happening. Have you followed any statistics, any trends within the city?
We've seen, you know, there's a lot of trends. We follow about every crime you can imagine. We try to plot that. We try to plot that out over 5, 10 years, and also year to year. The problem with just looking at year-to-year trends is, if a crime is down 10% 3 years ago, up 5%, and then, you know, you can end up getting caught up where it looks like major crimes are up or down with only a few variables. So we try to track a little more long-term on that 5 and 10 year aspect, because you can get caught up in the numbers very easily, and we try to figure out exactly what the trends are long-term, what we need to be throwing our assets at, where we need to be focusing. So we track a lot of stuff where, you know, things like traffic accidents and fatalities and things like that. When those start rising, we try to work a little more traffic enforcement to see if we can knock those numbers back down. Right now, we're seeing, you know, a rise in property crime and things like that. Some of the smaller crimes that are, you know, there's still quality of life issues. You know, if somebody breaks into your car or steals something off your porch, a package or something, that's a huge thing to you. So we're seeing a rise in that right now, where some of the other major crimes we may see a fall on, but it kind of ebbs and flows.
So when you have that growing problem of packages being stolen or cars and driveways being broken into, you're able to get your officers to do more patrols in the neighborhoods.
Well, we do what's called an impact report every month, where we look at crime and crime trends and where they're occurring at, and then we try to kind of focus on those areas so we can see where we need our assets at for that month or the months to come after that. It's, you know, at times, sometimes you're chasing crime. At times, sometimes you can predict what's still going. So it's very dependent on time of the year, availability. You know, most crimes are crimes of opportunity. So you know, we know around the holidays, obviously package theft is going to go up. Sometimes of the year, mail theft and things like that go up, especially around tax time. So there's certain things you can kind of plan for, and, you know, so we can start that enforcement. We can start that public education piece where we're giving that information out on how to keep yourself safe and not become a victim.
Now, you mentioned public education, so community involvement. I've heard the term community policing, or people just being a part of that process of keeping an eye out what's happening in the community. I
think you know, a big part of that has been going on for years and years. We coined the term kind of mid-90s as far as community policing, but I think it's a lot of it was going on before that. It's that officer getting out in those neighborhoods, talking to people, and it's also those citizens calling us. You know, I often tell people that we'd rather respond 5 or 6 times to a false alarm or somebody suspicious in a neighborhood that turns out to be nothing than the one time somebody gets their house broke into or their car broke into. So call us when you see things. So a lot of that community policing is just that interaction of getting those citizens to call us and let us know what's going on, so we can in turn try to reduce their, you know, victimization.
So how are you encouraging your officers to get more involved in the community, or be more, you know, visible, or get to know John Q. Smith down the street or whatever?
There's several ways we're doing that. We've done, you know, we've done different things where they've helped out with athletic events. We send them to events just to be present, to be seen. We encourage them to get out and stop by that Kool-Aid stand on an afternoon, you know, and when it's 105 degrees outside and they're selling, you know, make those interactions as much as you possibly can. Same thing in schools. We'd much rather you know a police officer when there isn't an issue than trying to get to know us after there's an issue. So we try to encourage that. One of the big things, I got to be honest with you, is staffing, because when you're totally reactive, or a lot of your crime is just what you're reacting to, and you're not self-initiating proactive things, that kind of limits in how much that community policing. So as we get back up in numbers, I think you're going to see a lot more of that, because when you sit down in a police car and you have 4 or 5 calls holding that you're trying to get knocked out, it limits some of your time that you can deal with the community. So hopefully as we increase our numbers, we're going to start seeing a lot more of that community involvement too.
Now, I know you also have a Facebook page, which is your social media and communication. I don't know if they can show that on the screen, but tell me about how Facebook's maybe playing a role with the police department.
Facebook kind of plays a huge role. and I'm not great at Facebook. I'm slowly coming along. What we try to do is we put numbers out after the weekends and things like that. We put major events as they occur, if there's areas you need to stay away from, traffic wrecks, things like that. But as you're seeing even on the screen right now, we started a officer spotlight where once a week we take an officer and we spotlight that officer. And one, I think it makes them more relatable to the community. You know, that's somebody's brother, uncle, their sister, their mother. They're a citizen just like everybody else. It's easier to relate to them. It gives you a little idea about their background and their training, so you know that they didn't just happen into this job, that they spent a lot of time, you know, working through to do what they're doing. But it's been great for us because we can get a lot of information out. We get a lot of feedback on that. We have the ability also on Facebook where they can report things to us on Facebook. They can ask questions. We use it as a huge tool for recruiting, obviously. Anytime we recruit or we're looking for people or anything like that, we put it on there. So Facebook's been a good thing for us. You know, as transparent as we are, we put a lot of information out there, so there's at times a negative side of that, but I think I'd rather deal with the negative side and let the public know what we're doing and what's going on than limit that information, because I believe transparency is critical in doing our job.
So if there's an incident or something, quote, big happening in town, you would post it versus the rumors going around on Facebook, go to the official source from the police department. Right.
There's several times that, you know, we've preemptively put things on there that we know are going to blow up, or there's a lot of information out there or misinformation on. So if we feel like we need to get that out there just to keep the public trust and let them know what's going on at that point, we'll preemptively post stuff sometimes, just say, hey, this is not as it seems, this is what actually took place. So it's been a good key for us.
So social media playing a role in policing and communicating with the community.
And you know, and a lot of people nowadays use that as their sole means of news. Sometimes if you don't get an information out there, it's not going to get portrayed right, and it's not going to get put out right. So I think you see a lot of, anytime we do anything major, we try to get a press release out as quick as we can. Even if we say, hey, this is what we can tell you right now and the investigation's continuing, we want to get something out there so you know what's going on.
You mentioned investigation continuing, and earlier you talked about the people who are in investigation on the detective side, that people don't realize that, you know, we have a call, but then you're following up on that behind the scene. That's the group that's helping. Are there trends? Are there certain people who are responsible for these thefts, you know, common threads and so forth? And
there's a lot of that that takes place. We actually have a crime analyst that she does a phenomenal job for us. She sits down and puts a lot of information together that would have been very hard in years past to even come up with. And so we're constantly looking at different trends and things, and she does a lot of linking for us. So this suspect is linked to 3 more crimes somewhere else, and then we put out a area bulletin that Joplin publishes that goes to all our law enforcement partners around the area. So if we're dealing with a certain type of crime or a certain subject or things that are going on in Joplin, those are the same people that are coming back and forth from different cities too. They're crossing state lines, they're living somewhere else, or our people are going to their town to commit a crime. There's no boundaries anymore. So that's been great for us to get information back and forth, and she does a lot of work for outside agencies too. So it's been huge for us since we've started using that way.
So you're really working with the neighboring communities, those towns that we border with, and, you know, really letting them know what's going on, and they let you know what's going on.
Yeah, because, you know, we're so close, obviously, to Oklahoma and Kansas that it all goes back and forth. There's hardly anything that stays localized anymore. So, you know, just like they come to Joplin for all the good things, sometimes they come to Joplin for the bad things too, and we have to deal with that. It's a lot easier when we have those partners and other agencies around the area helping us out with names and people and faces.
Good. Well, as you visit in the community as chief and you're meeting people in the new position, what are you hearing from citizens? What are some of the things they talk to you about? You
know, I'm getting great feedback across the board. I've really been impressed. I started going out before I took the job, even trying to meet with as many people as I could and conduct some interviews, because it's awful easy as a law enforcement officer to kind of get in a bubble and think you're doing things great and think everything's going right, but getting out in the community and talking to people and seeing what they think we're doing good, what they think we could improve on, what they see as their personal issues, be it traffic in their neighborhood, be it thefts from vehicles. I got a lot of feedback as I did that, and most of it overall was fantastic feedback. There's a lot of support still for law enforcement in this area, and you know, that's what we constantly remind our people. There is a ton of good people that live in this area. You're in the greatest job in the world, and sometimes it takes a while to remember that, and that you're doing noble work. It's a good thing. But getting out in the community, that's one of the things that I've garnered from a lot of those interviews and sitting down with a lot of people. When we were trying to pass the pension, we actually went out to coffee clubs. We went out and had breakfast with different groups. We spoke to, you know, different groups like Rotary, like Kiwanis, all these, you know, different not-for-profits and agencies around, and charities and stuff that we were talking to, and that helped us get a lot of feedback too at that point. So overall, it's good. It is good. They want to see more officers on the street. They want them to be visible in their neighborhoods. But other than that, we're getting a lot of good feedback.
Great. And do you encourage that input from people? You know, maybe somebody who's watching today who says, I'd like to, you know, share my thoughts?
Absolutely. You know, I have an open door policy. Call and make a meeting, set a meeting with me. Call in and let us know what's going on. We have comments on Facebook, on our website, that you can compliment an officer, that you can make a complaint if you feel like that something didn't go right and you want to make a complaint. We have an internal affairs department that also takes those complaints, but we want that feedback. We want to know how we're doing. We're trying to be as transparent as we can within the limits of the law. You know, there's some things obviously we can't release immediately, but generally when they're allowed to be released, we make that public so the citizens can see what's going on. But yes, we definitely welcome that feedback.
Well, Chief, it sounds like you have a lot of opportunities for the future here in Joplin, and as the department is restaffing, as you say, some for the community as well, getting more people on board to help out. So,
definitely an exciting time.
I'd like to thank you for joining me today on the program.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank our viewers for joining us this week on Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. I hope you can join me again next week at the same time on the station. We'll see you then.